Tonight, we're talking all about the causes and triggers for Kundalini awakening. I'm your host, Brent Spirit, and this is another Kundalini After Dark session. I'm live on Zoom. We've got 18 others in the Zoom room. We've got 10 others tuning in on YouTube. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to hearing from you all about how your Kundalini awakening process may have begun. So I'll share some overview of all of the different various ways that Kundalini awakening can be triggered. And then I'm going to open the floor for others to share as well about your experiences. And we can also go off topic a little bit if you want to discuss some other interesting themes to do with Kundalini awakening. Maybe you've got some questions for the group. Maybe you've got some responses to questions from other group members. I'm going to open the floor up and we'll share together and support one another and come together in community to normalize this process, to validate one another, and to keep each other company. So if you're listening to the recording in the archive, you can join us for the next After Dark session. You can visit brentspirit.com/afterdark to register. The links are all in the description. A bunch of links to the description for a bunch of other free things, courses, many other segments of the Kundalini Awakening series. I think something like 100 parts now, so lots to listen to. If you're curious, check it out. Links are all in the description. If you're tuning in on Spotify and you can leave a rating for the show, I'd really appreciate that. It goes a long way. Thank you all so much if you've left a rating already. You can also leave a comment on YouTube. You can hit subscribe, all that blah, blah, blah stuff. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And to those that have offered a donation, thank you. Thank you. This allows me to do this. I really appreciate it. Okay. So what are the ways that Kundalini can be awakened? Well, of course, as we know, this may be a bit of a more general quote unquote beginner topic, but I'm sure some interesting conversation will come out of it. There are many different ways that Kundalini can be awakened. Of course, most people have had their Kundalini awakening process triggered by a variety of different methods and approaches and techniques, if you will. Often a combination of these various tools, you could say. Most often, people have their Kundalini awakening process triggered unintentionally, right? And that's because many of the things that we're about to discuss, such as meditation, they offer not just the potential to awaken Kundalini, but they also offer many other benefits as well. So most people engage in something like meditation, seeking the benefits of maybe better mental health, right? And then inadvertently, they may end up having a full-blown Kundalini awakening, which they may not have been prepared for whatsoever. They may have no idea that this is possible. They may not know what Kundalini is. And it may have not been anything that they were looking for, right? They may have just been wanting to improve their mental health, relieve some anxiety, feel a little bit more calm. Now suddenly they're going through this far out trip. I'm one of those people. I know speaking to many of you all previously, I know many others have had similar experiences in which their Kundalini awakening process happened unintentionally. And I'm curious about some of your stories. So let's go over some of the ways that Kundalini can be triggered. So there are some, of course, advanced yoga practices that were intentionally practiced traditionally with the intention of preparing the system for eventual Kundalini rising, right? So certain yoga postures, asanas, breathwork, pranayama, certain meditations, certain visualizations, all of these various things that today we use for maybe just well-being. Maybe you go to a typical yoga studio in the city in the West here, and they're engaging in some asana practices, some meditation, some breathwork, some pranayama for well-being. But originally, those advanced yoga practices were really meant to awaken Kundalini, right? So Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which is one of the sort of seminal texts for Hatha Yoga, for some of the common styles of yoga we see in yoga studios today. If you read that text, it's all about awakening Kundalini. 100% of the text is just about awakening Kundalini and then entering into deep states of meditation and samadhi. But today we've got people that teach Hatha Yoga who have no idea what Kundalini is. And so they're teaching it, and then suddenly their students may end up going through a Kundalini awakening, and it can be pretty challenging for all involved, right? So, of course, traditionally, these practices were specifically used to awaken Kundalini, but today, not necessarily so, right? Because like I said, there's many benefits to all these practices. Another way that Kundalini awakening can be triggered is through traumatic experiences. So emotional or physical trauma can trigger Kundalini awakening, specifically in moments of extreme fear or danger, right? So perhaps some people enter into a very meditative space as a way to find some sort of relief or escape from whatever's going on in their situation. And this extreme meditative state could, in some respects, be considered in alignment with dissociation, which is, of course, a trauma response. And this expanded state can, at times, though rather rare, induce a profound Kundalini awakening, right? Also, physical trauma, right? So sometimes, in rare cases, people experience some blunt force trauma to the tailbone, and this can somehow trigger this Kundalini awakening to rise, right? So, not very common, somewhat rare, but of course, it is something that's not unheard of, right? So, virtually all of the methods and techniques and approaches and ideas that I'm about to share here, we have to remember that though they have the potential to awaken Kundalini, it's still very much a rare occurrence. So we have millions of people practicing yoga. Very few are having Kundalini awakenings, right? We have millions of people entering into dissociative states because they're experiencing trauma. Very few having Kundalini awakenings as a result of it, right? People experience blunt force trauma, falling off their bike or a horse or some sort of car accident all the time, every day, but very few are having Kundalini awakenings. So that's something to keep in mind, right? It's a rather rare phenomena. Drug use, in particular psychedelics and plant medicine, this can, of course, also trigger Kundalini awakening. So certain substances like magic mushrooms, ayahuasca, cannabis, DMT, LSD, and others can, of course, lead to a Kundalini awakening, right? Put us into these really profound altered states of consciousness. We can get more in touch with the energy in our body. We can become more present. We can have sort of surrendered states where we become totally relaxed. We give our power up to a higher power. And then, of course, that can in turn, at times, though not always, trigger a Kundalini awakening. So plant medicine is very common trigger, very common trigger. But of course, people are using plant medicine all around the world, all day, sometimes, and not everyone is having a Kundalini awakening. Okay, so something to keep in mind. So there are also some mind-based meditations. So practices such as self-inquiry, right, which you may have heard of out of Advaita Vedanta, popularized by, of course, Sri Ramana Maharshi. The question, who am I? What am I? Asking this question over and over and using it not just as a question for an intellectual or philosophical contemplation, but actually as an energetic device to take us somewhere beyond the body and the mind, right? So this question, who am I? What am I? Can also look very similar to the koans that they use in Zen Buddhism, right? What is the sound of one hand clapping, right? So these questions, a person could sit with them, engaging with them, chewing on them on the level of the mind, and this can open them up to a very expanded states of consciousness. Within Advaita Vedanta, one can realize the self with a capital S, right? So this can also in turn trigger Kundalini awakening, right? So Sri Ramana Maharshi's teachings didn't focus on Kundalini, and many who sort of pass on his teachings don't seem to always emphasize Kundalini or recognize it as valid or important or necessary or fundamental to this process of self-realization or awakening, right? So there's a quote here which I found by Sri Ramana Maharshi where he says, in the Jnana Marga meaning the path of knowledge, when by self-inquiry, the mind is merged in the self, its Shakti or Kundalini rises automatically, right? So in the Jnana Marga, when by self-inquiry, the mind is merged in the self, its Shakti or Kundalini rises automatically, right? So this is one way Kundalini awakening can be triggered through the practice of self-inquiry. On the level of the mind, we can sit with this question, who am I? What am I? Really going deep with it, almost like to have that question playing with intense fervor, right? Great zeal, nonstop. Eventually something opens up because it's not just a question, like I said, it's an energetic tool, an energetic device. As well, mind-based meditation, such as focusing on abiding as awareness. Maybe you have access to expanded states of awareness already to witness the mind, to witness the body, to witness the phenomena of your emotional experience, for example. So if you continue to abide there, this can also once again, merge you into the self, which would allow space for Kundalini begin to rise within the body, right? So these are some ways that Kundalini can be awakened with mind-based meditation. There's a different path, the Bhakti Marga, the path of devotion. Devotion. So the way I like to think of devotion is it's an emotional relationship with the higher power. It's an emotional relationship with the self, with God, with Shakti, right? With source, however you like to think about it. So emotions, where do they take place? They take place within the body, right? We feel emotions. We feel a racing heart. We feel warmth in our heart, for example. We feel something in our stomach, right? We get butterflies. We get excited. So they're all felt in the body. So bhakti to me is a body-based path. It's a heart-based path, not so much philosophical or intellectual like the path of knowledge, right? It's a bhakti-based path, bhakti-based path. So deep, sincere prayer or mantra repetition can lead to a Kundalini awakening, right? So we see this in some Christian contemplative traditions, some yogic practices that focus on chanting, remembering God, feeling love for God in one's heart, cultivating that sense of bhakti, that sense of devotion, right? Total surrender. So this is why we may see in some traditions people dancing ecstatically, people weeping, crying in joy, in bliss, in ecstasy. People maybe in a church, they're singing gospel hymns with great love, right? They're moving into devotional states. So if you ask them, what is God? They may not have any answer for you. It's like, it's too philosophical, it's too intellectual, it's too rational. It's like, God is a feeling, something in my heart. It's love in my heart. So that's the path that they take, right? And so that may, of course, trigger a Kundalini awakening in them, right? A heart explosion of energy for them, which of course is something that many people experience as they go through Kundalini awakening, some interesting phenomena happening in the heart, right? So of course, we know many people around the world, all the time, people are praying. Very few are having Kundalini awakenings, right? Still rare. To me, I think it's because it's that great devotion, that fervor, that surrender, that not everyone who prays has. Some people pray as it's a routine or they're asking God for something. They're not really connecting with God on an emotional level. And so that's why they're not really opening themselves up to really have the force of God, the power of God flowing through their nervous system, right? Flowing through their chakra system, which is, of course, Shakti, the Kundalini, right? So superficial efforts in this regard rarely lead to Kundalini awakening, right? You have to be a real devotee. Or in some respects, you have to come to a point where you're completely on your knees. Life has become unmanageable. And you say, I have no power. God help me. And that request, God help me, is so pure and true. And it's just so deep that then God responds. And, of course, the awakening process can really begin to blossom at that time. So we hear that for some people, maybe they've hit rock bottom on their journey and suddenly they hear of the voice of God or something very, really miraculous happens to them. It shifts their entire life. It's because in that moment they really cried out and their cry was really genuine, not superficial at all, right? Really genuine. So that's what it takes to be on the path of bhakti, right? Great devotion. Another way is through Shaktipat, which is, of course, the transmission of Shakti from one person to another, right? A little bit of a nuance there. It doesn't have to necessarily come from a person. It can also come from the universe, right? We can invoke Shakti through devotion. And the universe can strike you with this transmission of energy. And sometimes people actually perceive being struck by lightning or experiencing something like the Holy Spirit descending upon them, right? Something like this can happen. But traditionally, this idea of Shaktipat is the idea of a transmission from one person to another. Typically, the person that's giving a transmission is somebody very advanced on the Kundalini journey, on the spiritual journey. They've developed a bit of a knack to transmit this power to another, right? So you may see that there are some who present themselves as a facilitator, a guru, a teacher, a guide, something like this, and they host an event, a Shaktipat event. You come, maybe you offer them something, a payment, a donation, a blessing, something. And then you maybe line up or you sit in the hall and they go around and they tap people on the forehead or they blast them with their hands like this, or they just gaze in their eyes, right? These are the different ways that a person can actually transmit the power of Shakti to another, right? So sometimes this happens in an active way. So you actively may go to an event by somebody who's reporting openly, I'm going to give Shaktipat, right? And other times it happens more passively. Right? Maybe you just happen to, for example, maybe you bump into a great spiritual master in the grocery store and you're in a position where you're receptive to their Shakti transmission and they're inspired intuitively through the divine within and they somehow look you in the eye and they zap you. And that can be something that happens. So, of course, many of us here have experienced receiving Shaktipat, but spontaneously we may have actually given it to some others as well, right? Not uncommon at all. Not uncommon at all, right? So this is another way that the Kundalini can be awakened. But of course, we have to remember, just like with the other methods, there's really no one size fits all, like one and done type situation. Even with Shaktipat, we still have to do our work. It's not a cheat code. It's not a free pass. We still have to continue our sadhana, our spiritual practice to work towards integration, embodiment, continued devotion, continued inquiry, right? Even after receiving something like Shaktipat. As well, not every great guru, master, or facilitator that can offer Shaktipat is able to transmit it in a powerful way to just anybody and everybody, right? The recipient has to be in the right place on their journey. Their karma has to have ripened. The person who's giving it has to be the person that's meant to give it to them as well, right? There's all sorts of different nuances related to karma and timing and all this sorts of things involved. So it's not so straightforward, this idea of Shaktipat. Well, it's very, very interesting. So some may also have what we may call a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, right? Like seemingly out of nowhere, right? Without any prior spiritual practice, right? While I recognize the validity of such a spontaneous awakening that seemingly happened out of nowhere, I've spoken to hundreds of people. Many have told me I had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. And then I asked them some questions, and turns out they were doing breath work, maybe Wim Hof, or they were doing this or that, or they went to a library and they found a book and they opened it and they just read a page and something hit them. And then a year later, they're telling me they had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. But turns out, like a lot of other spiritual things were happening in their journey, they just didn't connect the dots. So I don't think there's really a spontaneous Kundalini awakening that happens truly out of nowhere. I think there's always some build up to it. It just people don't necessarily know that the things that they were doing or experiencing were related to their quote unquote spontaneous Kundalini awakening. There's also something to be said, why do some people meditate for 20 years and don't have this experience? And then some people, all they do, like I said, maybe, random example, I'm just making up off the top here, but maybe they go to a bookstore, they open a random book to a page, they have some sort of transmission or some sort of realization, and now they have a Kundalini awakening, right? All they did was open a book. Whereas the other person's been meditating for 20 years, studying texts and doing all sorts of things, and they haven't had a Kundalini awakening. Why is that? Well, one thing to consider is perhaps there's past life progress and spiritual cultivation that, comes to manifest at certain points on our journey. And maybe that person who happened to just open a book randomly in the bookstore spent, lifetimes and lifetimes in deep meditation already. And now is just the time for them to pick up where they left off. So just some interesting things to consider, maybe some things you can contemplate based on your own journey. Some people also come into this life with what we may refer to as an already awakened Kundalini from a previous lifetime where their Kundalini was awakened. So this is something I've heard from some very respectable teachers, and I'm not one to necessarily argue against it. But one thing I've recognized is that even though some people may come into this lifetime with an already awakened Kundalini, that doesn't mean that in this lifetime, they're not going to experience a profound energetic rising per se, right? Or any intense phenomena. You can have multiple risings in one lifetime. I've had multiple intense Kundalini risings in this lifetime, right? When I had some experiences of previous incarnations, I remember working with Kundalini as well in those lifetimes too. So just something to share here. Even though you may have had significant Kundalini awakening experience in previous lifetimes, you can still have pretty intense stuff going on in this lifetime too, right? So this idea of, already having Kundalini awakened or already being born with an awakened Kundalini, I'm not sure exactly what that entails or what it means. Admittedly, a lot of this stuff I actually don't know, but that's why I've come up with some, very basic, simple practices that are universal that can be applied across the board. Of course, you've all heard me talk about it a million times: self-care, general meditation, working towards integration, embodiment, connecting with the higher power, right? Studying, relating, right? Universal. Whether you had a awakened Kundalini in 10 previous lifetimes, whether it's your first day on the path, it doesn't matter. The things I share are quite universal. And finally, there's one other method I have on my list here for how Kundalini can be awakened, and that's through some occult practices, right? Some magic practices. So, yes, it's true. There are some certain occult techniques and whatnot that have been practiced specifically to manipulate this Kundalini force, to manipulate the Shakti, to bring it to certain areas within the system in certain ways to perhaps trigger certain siddhis or psychic powers or psychic abilities in people so that they can, of course, use those abilities for ego gain and whatnot. It's a valid thing. It is real. It has happened. It does happen. But of course, it doesn't pay off, right? A person who's experiencing these things is still going to suffer, even if they have powerful psychic abilities. They're still suffering because, of course, as we know, the Buddha said, life is suffering, life is unsatisfactory. So even if you have magical powers, you're still going to suffer, right? So Kundalini awakening, moving towards oneness with God, union with God, enlightenment, self-realization, that will relieve suffering. Magical stuff, it's valid, it's real, but you will suffer and likely suffer greatly if that's something that you end up with an interest in exploring. It is a known thing, but I like to keep a bit of a complete picture here, so I didn't want to leave that one out. Interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. So I'm going to open the floor up now. I want to hear from some others about your Kundalini awakening triggers and causes. Uh, I guess I could briefly share about some of mine, though many of you have heard my stories. Virtually all of these, except for maybe the trauma, the occult stuff, have been relevant to me. I did some yoga classes. I did some meditation, just looking to relieve anxiety and stress and whatnot. Of course, I explored psychedelics intentionally for spiritual growth. Intentionally for spiritual growth. Psychedelics were very effective for me with my Kundalini process, right? I engage in intense mind-based meditation practices, self-inquiry, asking what is true, who am I, what is the nature of reality, really intensely. And this opened me up for some profound experiences, right? Um, of course, today, bhakti is where I find myself really landing. I feel like, there's really no end to how much devotion we can have for the higher power and how much love and warmth that can really stir up within us. I don't think there's any end to that. So just yesterday, I actually went to a Buddhist garden here in Ontario called Wu Tai Shan Buddhist Garden. And there are just these massive statues, idols uh, to the Buddha. And it just evoked immense bhakti in me, immense reverence and gratitude. And so these are some of the things that I continue to explore. And of course, they've been very effective for me even to continue my process and sort of add fuel to the fire with these bhakti practices. Shaktipat for me, I received Shaktipat in a handful of ways. Um, some of them were sort of in mystical, spiritual realms, you could say, so not from a physical teacher or facilitator or anything like that. I did receive a sort of energetic transmission. In a sense, Kundalini Shakti, this energy field is kind of contagious. So if you get close to a person and you're ripe, they can kind of rub off on you in a little bit, in a sense. So I was hanging around this pretty radiant energy healer around the same time that all of this kind of happened to me. So when I look overall at my journey, I see that there was just a variety of all of these different approaches that contributed to my awakening. There's no one thing that really did it for me. It was just a variety of all of these things coming together, right? A variety of all of these things coming together. So I'll pause there. Check out some of the links in the description. Check out kundaliniawareness.org. You can submit your story. You can also read some stories about others and their Kundalini awakening process and how things unfolded for them. You can also submit yours. We'd love to have your story in the directory. We're here to raise awareness about this and normalize the process. You can also find a directory of licensed mental health professionals with Kundalini awakening experience there to support you, to validate you. So this is Kundalini After Dark. I'm going to open the floor up. I want to hear from you all. Let's see what others have to share about how their Kundalini awakening process began. You can push back on some of the things I've said as well. We're here for that. It's all welcome. I don't have all the answers. I'm just here to start some conversations. So let's go over here to Claire.
Hi, hello.
Hi, Claire.
Hi, I want to share my experience. It's very clear because it's like almost one time and then it's done thing because I first got it through a mushroom retreat. It was just me and my partner, just two of us. We went super, super deep into that retreat. We got somewhere deep than what we usually journeyed. Before that, I have many mushroom psychedelic experience already. At that time, I think I was 22, and it's just massive Kundalini energy coming through. At first, I don't know what it is. It was just shaking, and I'm moving my butt. I dance very flowy, lot of automatic flow coming through. And after 8 hours, I can still kind of call it, and then it dissipates. And that was my first time. And then the next few times, it all have been calmed through with this mushroom. And finally, when I started this diet, I cut out all carbs and cut out all proteins and all the triggering stimulatives in my diet. Um, really truly open my heart and meditate. The first time the Kundalini came without any psychedelic, and since that I'm just being able to freely control it. Yeah, that's my experience. I have a mantra practice day to day. I've been doing yoga at least 3 hours a day and meditation now the process. It's been really helpful for my physical pain. That's my journey.
Wow.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for sharing. Thank you, Claire. I like that you share with us that yes, your awakening had been influenced by psychedelics, but you've experienced also this completely sober without psychedelics. Very fascinating. I just did a presentation, or sorry, an interview with the Institute for Global Transformation with Ken Marks, and I described my awakening journey, which, like I said, involved psychedelics, and naturally that opened the conversation up and for, was this just drugs? So somebody said, hey, well, can you experience some of this stuff? Have you experienced any of this phenomena when you're, not on psychedelics? And I said, absolutely. Some of the most far out stuff I've experienced has been when I'm sober. But yeah, the psychedelic thing is definitely an interesting theme.
I think the psychedelic is a cheat. It's a cheat code.
Sure.
It's not something bad. Usually when you cheat, you just get higher score. There's no discrimination kind of against that. It's a download, like at that time, my consciousness is probably not on that high level, but the psychedelic give me a kick. And the download remained in my bodily field. That's
Mhm.
how I would describe it. Thank you.
Really well said. Really well said. Yeah. And of course, you've continued with your integration practices like you described, right? You continue to meditate and practice intensely. So very inspiring. Thank you for sharing, Claire. Let's go over here to Deborah.
Hi, Brent. Hi, everyone.
Deborah.
In your introduction, you talked a lot about devotion, and I would characterize my journey as a devotional one for sure. Even though, of course, like many others, we go through different phases and different peak experiences and other times. But one thing that really stood out to me, gosh, I would say almost 25 years ago. Um, I was I was one of those people that was like, as I experienced different things, I wanted to share it. I wanted to bring more peace to the world, um, and at times I probably was a bit of a minister on a soapbox kind of a thing, But that's all good, That's pretty natural, and I understand it more now. But what I've come away with over all these years, and the lasting, sustaining effect for myself has been um, to somehow, like you were talking about, you might meet somebody in a supermarket and they just look at you in a certain way, and there's something that changes and shifts. And I've experienced that many times, um, and it feels like every time this happens. It's like I'm at the right place at the right time for someone to know that someone cares, something as simple as that. You don't need to read into any more that you might see in their eyes and their disposition, but not only somehow just being so present that you know that they are loved, but oftentimes in conversations, especially difficult conversations, this has somehow allowed me to reframe different ideas in a way that I can ask questions or propose ideas that it doesn't seem like it's coming from my brain, from my mind, from my knowledge. It always seems to come from a heart-centered place, and it's always centered in love every single time. How much I care, how much I feel, and that I care about you so much, and that you are loved.
Beautiful, Deborah. That resonance is there even in your voice. I'm sure I'm not the only one that can feel that, hear that. I like how you've returned it to a very simple place. Right? We can talk all about these various methods of awakening Kundalini and all this sort of stuff and use Sanskrit and all this, but ultimately it boils down to the love. The love. Thank you. Thank you. Let's hear from Samia.
Good evening, family. How you doing?
Great.
How's everybody? Hope everybody's doing well. Love this group. Sorry, there's a lot of distractions going on.
No problem.
Uh, I believe, I met with you a long time ago when I was first kind of going through this process as well. And I also still believe that it was a reawakening of Kundalini for me. Really believe it started in my 20s. I was into a lot of, not the best habits and different types of psychedelic drug use and, ecstasy, shrooms, whatever else we do when we're young. And then back then I did so much of it. I had a little allegedly psychotic break. And then I was put into the mental hospital for a couple different times. And I remember when that happened, voices coming in and I was just feeling all different types of feelings. And, the first thing people do is put you in a mental hospital. So, and then from the age of 21, 22, 23 on, I've been on heavy psych beds for a number of years until last year when I weaned myself off. And then as I weaned myself off and cleaned out my diet and did different things, and I've always been practicing, some type of yoga, but meditation started in too. The effects, the Kiras started, like different things started showing up. And as the more I got off my meds and everything else, it just came on like um, a raft of, I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I found your videos online, thank God, one night. I was like, this is kind of what I'm going through. Let me listen to these videos. Holy crap. Like I'm looking up things. I'm thinking it's the, I'm detoxing off these meds and I'm getting all these shakes, but it's an intelligence. It was intelligent energy. And I was like, okay, this is an intelligent energy. It, it shakes yes, it shakes no. It kind of tells me things like this is not making any sense. But the more I sat and listened, the more it made sense. And then I went through um, all these periods of definitely ego deaths and dark nights. And there was a time for a while where I couldn't even meditate at all. And I loved meditating, but I just could not. It was a time where I had to step away even from this group because the energies were so strong. I sit into it, I'd be somewhere else sitting here. And so I had to just honor that and step back. And then it's been a ride, but through the ebbs and falls, like I do find the beauty of it, and I found different practices like this, especially the one where when you hold space, as you express a couple of different times, holding space for the energy, once or twice a day, and heavy in my mist, I had to do that, and then beyond doing that, it got so much better. It got so much better. At times, I went through a couple of instances where I had to purge. I'm living in my third state out of about last 6 months. So it's been it's been hard. It's hard to. I think it's more of a challenge when you have to kind of step back and live with people and try to get your life together. And I think I feel more shame and guilt how other people perceive me, but they love me and they accept me. And so as I leaned in and find different communities like this online, and I'm part of a channeling group that's kind of been doing my journey with me too, and a psychic group, and all these other cool abilities started as well. Um, so things are changing. Um, I believe it was definitely a choice I made. I believe that this started lifetimes ago, but my point going back to how it began is it started in my 20s, and due to modern science, say, okay, you have this illness and you get on all these meds. And they said it'd be on my meds for the rest of my life. And I knew deep and down inside, no. And I made changes in my job, and later on, like I said, get off the meds, and then this awakening happened. Um, it's partly it's sometimes a hinder, but I wouldn't trade it for the world at times because it's just such a special thing that is inside all of us. Um, as I grow more and not really figure it out, but learn to go with the ebbs and flows, I think I will like really be able to fall in love with it. I fall in love with it at times, and then the other times I'm like, um, but thanks for this community and thanks for other people, and even going on Facebook sometimes and writing or just responding to other people is just so helpful. So thank you. Um, and as I don't know if anybody else knows my story about the 8-day trip, do not do psychedelics. Um, towards I was going through this awakening, and I think it was like 5, 6 months in, and I don't know why I thought it'd be a good idea. I guess the stars aligned. It was a certain date. Oh, let's do some bufo and do some cow and do all this. Okay. And I strongly suggest if you're in this process, do not take any type of mind altering drug. That's just my opinion. Um, I did that in clearing, and the one ceremony lasted, had effects for 8 days, and not from the bufo frog. It was just my awareness and everything just blasted open, and I was seeing things, visuals, skies breaking apart. I just saw a lot of stuff for 8 days straight, and it was very horrifying. But I worked through all that, and it was very light at the same time because my one intent when I went into this process with the bufo, and it was very ceremonial. It wasn't like partying. It was very ceremonial, but I wanted to release fear. All my fears. It's a year and a half later. But I looking back, it was things I've never seen and experienced, but I went through them. I went through them. It was a time where I was so I was afraid of the dark. I was afraid to be alone after all that happened. And I went through them. And now, 6 months later, 3 states away, starting my life over. Yes, but I have so much more opportunity. And it's taught me to trust this energy in me. It has taught me to trust myself and love myself. And it has taught me just you have to do some pivoting and go with the flow. And it's a process, but I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Hmm.
So thanks for letting me share.
Oh, thank you, Samia. So inspiring, so courageous. Thank you. Of course, we're just a bunch of people here on the internet, just chatting, not discussing any medical advice or anything like that. But of course, the topic of medication comes up now and then, and it seems like the medication is actually effective at calming some of this extreme spiritual phenomena down, even though they may not recognize it as spiritual phenomena. It seems that this is somewhat common. Um, I love the work of Stanislav Grof, right? Psychiatrist, wrote a book, Spiritual Emergency, in which he says, hey, maybe this isn't mental illness. This is something else of a spiritual nature. So that work was really insightful for me. Fascinating shares, Sumi. I like how you said, your intention for the trip was to overcome fear. Yeah, we get often what we ask for, but it's quite intense. I remember my major Kundalini rising took place on a mushroom trip, and my intention was, I want to get a little bit more in touch with the energy in my body. Yeah, that's what happened. It's been 10 years, still working on that. 9 years, still working on that. Very very interesting the way our intentions are answered. Tenfold, thousandfold. Thank you, Samia. I'm gonna go over here to the chat. Hugo shares here that yes, for me, the trauma root, suffering, existential questions, on my knees begging, please, there has to be more to this experience. If there is a God or creator, who, where are you? Reveal yourself. I'm done with this pain. And K, boom. Amazing. So this is what I was speaking about when I described, people come to that point where they're asking with such great emotional energy behind it. What a great example. And then, of course, our questions, our prayers get answered in really profound ways. Tracy shares here, I sense that meditation, which I began practicing simply to calm anxiety, combined with a period of stress, culminating in a sudden emotional trauma, instigated my awakening suddenly. It all began at my job. It resulted in the destruction of my career. I wonder if a new interest in using tarot cards for introspective guidance also triggered it. Well, I can throw my 2 cents in here. I think that the general idea of using tarot cards for receiving guidance opens you up to a higher power, right? Something beyond your mind, right? You're saying higher power, source, God, tarot masters in the ethers, support me, guide me, help me, right? We open ourselves up to something greater. And then, of course, that makes us a great receptacle for Kundalini to begin to move through our system. John shares here the term drishti, which is the Shakti transmission from the gaze. Right. Sati Devi shares here, trauma started mine. 2020, being a nurse, working insane hours and extremely short staffed, doing at home learning with my son with ADHD, never having a day to myself for over 2 years. I was irate and finally surrendered. That's when it happened after a few brief months of Kundalini yoga, pranayama, chanting, and japa. What a combination. You had almost everything going on there. Great surrender combined with spiritual practice, right? The divine responds. So let's go over here to Joanna, and then I'll jump back in the chat and see what people are sharing.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for all your beautiful shares and for this lovely community and the platform to speak. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I just wanted to share kind of how my awakening, I suppose, kick-started and where that led to. I feel a little bit nervous, like talking about it, but yeah, it's something I'm trying to make myself do a little bit more because I find that like the intelligence of speaking from the heart be heard and received. So yeah, thank you. Basically, I think I was born pretty much just like zing, and then over the course of about 25 years, I just accrued so much trauma that I just systematically started like shutting myself down, like all of my essence, basically. Like my dad's side of the family has like incredible lineage of trauma. It's like there's so much in the family, and it all got downloaded into me. My parents split up when I was 8, and I'm seeing how like the left side of the body and the right side of the body sort of are rejecting each other, and like how that's playing out within me. And there was this fundamental invalidation that just kind of meant that I was looking for this love on the outside, and it was never really there. And so I would invalidate that part of me and replace it with something else. So I sort of, over a period of 25 years, built this false self, which was all just about avoiding my pain and trauma, until I accrued so much that my entire body just felt black inside, just like completely just like devoid of life, and was manifesting as all these physical illnesses, carpal tunnel, chronic fatigue, breathing problems, bladder problems, like you name it. I was physically just an absolute mess, and there were no answers. And yeah, nobody ever really received me in my expression and my truth. So I just gradually invalidated myself more and more and more, to the point where the true essence of me had been sort of bound up in all these like traumas. Um, until I met an acupuncturist at the beginning of, what year are we? Yeah, beginning of 2022. So that Christmas 2021, I was like totally just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then yeah, I met this acupuncturist and he explained to me fear of bodily sensations and 3 needles and fuck, like, sorry for my profanity, but it put me in my wounded self again. I had this procedure. I went home. I think I actually smoked some weed, and then it put me in bed for about 3 months, where I was just breathing. I was either inhaling or exhaling, or on an inner retention or outer retention. And all of my carpal tunnel tendonitis, everything just started evaporating off of me. And it's like, oh, I found it. Like, okay, here I am again. And that started a process. I didn't know it was Kundalini awakening yet. That got revealed sort of later in the year, when I started getting sort of messages on my mirror and things like that. That was very scary. I lived in quite a spiritually charged household the second half of that first year, and that was really, really, really tough, that whole thing, because I didn't really have a grasp or an understanding what was going on. And then about a year and a half in, I encountered my guru and this other person who I suppose is like a guru, but more in the divine feminine sense. And then, yeah, I've just been in the process of integrating, but the integration, I've realized that the traumas that I've experienced on an individual level, because I did transcend my karma and I continuously come back here to do this work, what I'm experiencing as my wounded, traumatized self is actually the collective playing out in my body. So it's a very deeply intimate, personal me breaking and me sort of dissolving through all these things. But then I also understand that it's playing out on these broader levels, because I've come to understand that your consciousness is technology, and how much that consciousness expands, the more sort of Shakti, or this existence, this life, can be kind of contained within it. And so within the sort of releasing of these packets of trauma, this remembering, this integration, this sort of wisdom emerges. But then it's also playing out around me and outside of me at the same time. And that's what's so scary, for me, because it's like every thought I think is happening outside too. And to be a container for this energy is like really powerful, because a lot of my limitations, my sort of limited separate self, is entirely based around shutting myself down. It's not actually based around self-exaltation whatsoever. But I think that because my light's been so rejected, I've kind of I feel under threat when I'm shining. I feel under threat when I'm embodied. I feel under threat when I'm actually in the state of surrender to the self. And I just want to express that the biggest, most profound transformative shift was that beginning of the process of realizing what that self actually is, because we're always looking to these externals. When this is happening, it's like, which practice should I do? How do I hold this? What do I want? How do I do that? And I really truly believe that we are sovereign creators on higher dimensional levels. But in order to be a sovereign creator, you need to fully integrate into truth first. And that's what the surrender is. So the surrender integrates you into this here now, the presence of divinity within the pure self that's the interconnected everything. And then through that being surrendered to that, you're you're experiencing truth. And then when you're experiencing truth, then the sovereignty comes. But we're kind of thinking about our autonomy before the surrendered state. And the surrendered state to me is just to be with what is as is. But then our receptivity, our responsibility, our ability to react is actually truly kind of infinite. And so, yeah, the biggest transformative thing for me was actually there's this singular point of truth inside. And if you devote to that, devote to that, devote to that, then you can experience God on the outer and on the inner. But that singular pure drop of consciousness that is you, that has been you through every single life, that is the memory of everything you've ever experienced, that is the gifts that you already have that are just sort of buried under these layers of things that you've accrued in this lifetime. I just found the sort of the intelligence of what I already am is waking up through the integration of these trauma packets, and that seems to be a collective undertaking at the same time. So when I'm on a bus, I'm really just focusing on that self because it anchors me into truth. But I'm also aware that like there's a lot of energy dynamics happening between me and other people, and as someone that just wants to be hidden, it's very hard for me to be in public because I don't want to draw attention to myself, but my body's just like, I'm going to yogi. And I'm just like, please, just like, can I just be invisible for a bit? But, I'm kind of ready to show myself and to express. I've just moved house, I've just moved to a new city and finally got a music studio again. I'm a professional musician, have been for years. This whole process sort of took me out of that. And now here I am, back in the flow and ready to sort of create transmissions on like all levels through just being a frequency and putting that into different channels and doing what's divinely guided, but also honoring my intention, which is to be a sovereign creator and to empower people to discover their true selves and realize what that really is so that we can collectively begin to co-create something more beautiful and harmonious. So yeah, that's kind of my backstory and where I'm at now. And
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you for listening.
Joanna, thank you for sharing, and thank you especially for moving through any of your resistance to share.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah.
Cheers.
Lots of wisdom. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go over here to Colin.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about what Joanna just said. I mean, that was beautiful, very eloquently said. You know, it really, yeah, it really struck a nerve. You know, it's like that's the thing with trauma. It's like when you have those moments where it's just released, where you finally break through after being crushed for like a lifetime. It's like you're just left with the self. That's all you are. There's no ego, there's no nothing except self, and you can't help but just awaken in that moment, you know. It's pretty wild. It's just like, you know, a big slab has been lifted off you. And there's nothing. You're in your rawest form and you can't help but wake up. Anyway, that's all I had to say.
Beautiful, Colin. Yeah, it's like a slab has been lifted. This is the purpose of the process, it seems, to heal us of these heavy weights that we carry. Not easy work, but hey, it's harder to carry those slabs than to release them, isn't it? Thanks, Colin. Catherine in the chat shares here, I've been in the lineage of mystics with many mystical experiences and connection to spirit from as early as I can remember. The archetype of the mystic's love affair with the divine resonates with me. The process has been long and varied with multiple phenomena. Right before the full-blown awakening, Jesus came to me very clearly stated, we are all one. And then at a huge heart opening with my twin flame, who had accelerated my process 8 years prior, and a portal opened and I saw divine perfection. My travels to Africa to heal with him were evident, and the reality that we had been one all along was clear. We shared energy non-locally, telepathic communication, and access to his spirit were constant. I've also been deeply involved with inner child healing due to severe childhood trauma related to my father, primarily, which has been catalyzed by inspirational meditation and expressive shaking and dancing. The intensity culminated with a shamanic dance workshop. I untethered. What a journey, Catherine. Thank you so much for sharing. What a trip. Which reminds me, I actually seem to have overlooked one other way that Kundalini can be awakened, which is a twin flame encounter. So there are some certain characters in our lives. Typically, they end up being romantic characters, romantic partners that seem to just activate some sort of profound spiritual transformational process within us. And so some may refer to those people as twin flames. So sometimes people have, of course, a relationship with this person. Sometimes they just see a person and they're just overwhelmed with this immense feeling of love, of spirituality, of devotion. Sometimes there's energetic phenomena happening within them when they encounter a twin flame. Even just seeing a picture online can be enough. So this seems to be something that's taking place on the planet of late, in that the idea of encountering a twin flame to facilitate spiritual transformation. My personal take on it is that twin flames come to help us to awaken. That's it. Not necessarily there to be our happily ever after romantic partners in a sense. But that's just my take. I know others disagree. Well, thank you so much for mentioning all of that, Catherine. Really profound. Mima Flowers shares here. Looks like a prayer. Great Mother, please release me from this fear. Beautiful. Powerful. Yabra shares here. I've been smoking cannabis and meditating / practicing self-inquiry for quite a while. One night while pondering, love the self, love the other, I was skewered in sacral chakra by a giant fire pillar. Far out. Very interesting. Deborah shares here on the chat. I was surprised and disappointed that my yoga teacher training didn't cover anything about Kundalini awakening. Sati Devi responds with, yes, very vaguely. I was not prepared, nor did I understand. Yeah. When I did a yoga teacher training, it was mentioned as like, almost as if like, apparently there's this energetic force called Kundalini and it can awaken and bring you to self-realization. And it was presented almost in a way as if like, let's not focus on that in this lifetime. Let's leave that for, maybe 10 lifetimes later. Right now, let's focus on where do we put our hands in downward dog. We spent more time focusing on that, anatomy and things like that. So I can relate, of course, if you can't tell, I am a little salty about yoga teacher training, but this is the way that things have unfolded thus far. We have to remember also that yoga in the West is a very new thing. The fact that people are exploring it even at all is quite meaningful, even if they're just focusing more on, where should your hips be in relation to your shoulders or whatever. At least it's kind of something and not nothing. Still very, very early, very early. That's what I tell myself, to calm down. Quincy's got a question here. Been wondering, I had a somewhat intense experience one night from looking at a picture. Is that something that is heard of? Joanna says, I find pictures to be very activating, especially from a bhakti perspective. Jeff says here, yes, definitely. Claire says, transmission through picture is a powerful way for sure. Quincy says here in response, it was interesting because I had no idea who it was. I heard the name, then I Googled them, then I was on my knees in tears. Incredible. Yes, yes. Transmission through pictures is something quite, I was about to say quite common, but of course none of this is quite common, but you get what I mean. It is a known thing. Many stories out there. I've spoken to a few people I have an interview with a great friend of mine, Tawny Todd, in which she describes finding Sri Ramana's picture in a gift shop. And if I'm not mistaken, she didn't know who he was, but just felt some great reverence to that picture. She also received a Shaktipat transmission from a picture of Muktananda, who was a Shaktipat guru way back. So just looking at this picture was enough to offer a transmission. Like you, Quincy, coming to your knees in tears, I heard of another story of somebody seeing a picture of Neem Karoli Baba, Maharaji, Ram Das's guru, Krishna Das's guru, and they just start crying. And they're like, I don't know who this old Indian guy is, but like I'm bawling my eyes out. So these things happen. And so Quincy's sharing here that the picture that he received this powerful transmission from was Padmasambhava. Interesting. Yes, Padmasambhava. Guru Rinpoche, one of the founders of Tibetan Buddhism. This is quite auspicious for me in a sense, because just yesterday, as I described, I was at the Wu Tai Shan Buddhist Garden in Kawartha Lakes, Ontario. And there they had a massive, massive statue of Padmasambhava. And when I stood in front of it, I put my hands together, I bowed in reverence, I made myself open and receptive, and I got a little bit of a kriya. It's a subtle, very gentle sort of jerk up my spine. And the eyes on that statue, they were like portals into the infinite void. Extremely powerful and captivating. And this was a statue. So, like we're describing here about pictures, this phenomena was going on much longer than just with pictures. Prior to the invention of the camera, transmissions were, of course, were happening through statues, through drawings, through paintings, right? Through the word, of course. Very, very interesting. Very interesting stuff, Quincy. Thank you so much for sharing. That sounds like quite a powerful experience. Let's go over here to Tom. If I'm not mistaken, I think Tom's had some experiences with some pictures.
Yeah, have, and many people, was why with remember, have had awakenings that way, or received Shaktipat that way, which is interesting in itself because it means that, or at least I think it means that the guru, the flesh and blood guru, doesn't have to be in with you, or you don't have to be in his or her presence. You could simply connect by thinking about the person, because he's not thinking about you necessarily. I mean, he's or she just, that guru is just there, wherever he is, having dinner or whatever, and your own thoughts are somehow intertwining with his or hers, and receiving Shaktipat from it. So, proximity has nothing to do with it. Kind of, which is also, well, the old thing in physics about two particles, or electrons changing their, or, I don't know, you probably know what I'm talking about, although I don't right now. At different places in the universe, interacting. Anyhow, just a weird thing. Maybe somebody can explain that. I can't. The Kundalini is everywhere, and if you want it, but some people have received Shaktipat from looking at a picture without wanting it. Just so God knows what's going on there. I don't. Just curious thoughts. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Tom. Yes, of course, this power is everywhere. It's nowhere. It's not limited to time or space. I don't know exactly what the mechanisms behind these sorts of transmissions really are. Intuitively, I get the sense that the universe is intelligent. Of course it is, but not in the sense of like artificial intelligence where it's just binary code that's very complex. I think it's wise, right? It's the universe is wise. And so when we perceive a picture on our computer, which is pixels on a screen, but it's depicting, a great master. The universe is wise. It knows that this is not just pixels. This is a depiction of a great master, and the transmission can come through. Right? I don't know how else it's working other than orchestrated by wisdom in such a way. Very interesting stuff. Let's hear from Claire.
Hi. I saw someone share the story about seeing the picture of Padmasambhava. I just want to talk a little bit more about this guru. Like he is born from a lotus. So in China, in Tibetan culture, we call it the lotus-born master. 莲花生, that's what it sounds like in his Chinese name. And his mantra is really, really beautiful. I think, yeah, you should definitely look it up about his mantra. And also there's another very interesting question that I want to bring up is that this question is about the approach to spirituality, because I know a lot of these mantras and practices is not granted to people. It's not granted to everyone. Like they are gatekeeping a little bit. And if we got a download, like just like we're grassroots and we were nobody in this genre and we're not a master, but we suddenly got a darshan, we got high energy transmission, and the gatekeepers, they might be really mad at us. They might be really pissed. I see the same thing happening in Kundalini Awakening. There's always some gurus in this tradition. They will speak very negatively about those who are aware in this practice on the Mao. And also same thing happened around this master. The Lotus master, I'm not sure if he set the rules. Nobody can practice his mantra unless they are bathed in ghee. I'm not sure what is the term. I'm sure that there is a term in their tradition, but if you are not like officially ordained, you cannot practice his mantra. But on the other hand, there's always like a cure to this type of gatekeeping, is that you practice another mantra and you can do this school of practice. So just very interesting things about the top-down approach and this bottom-up approach that most of us is doing at this point. Thank you.
Yeah. Fascinating, Claire. Of course, some of these practices are very powerful. Some of these mantras are very powerful, and they are given to people who, have been initiated into a particular tradition, and they're kept esoteric, secret, right? Because there's great power there. But I think there's also something to be said about politics. Also something to be said about keeping people generally safe, right? Because some of these mantras and things, these practices, like we've been describing, today we have access to them, but people are exploring them and they're having profound Kundalini awakenings and they think they're going crazy. Their whole life is falling apart. So in some respects, it can be, perhaps protective of the general population to not give them practices unless they've been properly initiated. And then therefore, when those practices work, they can be supported when things get difficult. So maybe that's one reason. But times are very different now, of course, with the internet. All of the knowledge has been spilled, right? Some things are still, of course, kept secret, but many things are available for anyone and everyone. And just for example, just yesterday, like I said, I was at this statue of Padmasambhava, and I looked up the mantra and I chanted this mantra a few times. And here we are today speaking about him. So I take this as a sign of my devotion being responded to through your shares, through Quincy's shares. Very interesting stuff. And I have not been initiated into any particular tradition. I was not initiated with that mantra, at least in this lifetime. So it's very interesting, very interesting. There is some gatekeeping, of course, like I said, some politics, but maybe to keep us safe as well. Maybe to keep us safe in a sense. Quincy shares here, I started chanting his mantra shortly after that experience, and after a while, I couldn't chant it. My mouth literally wouldn't let me. That lasted a few days, and now I can chant it again, but I don't often. Very, very interesting, right? Fascinating stuff. Thank you all for sharing. Jeff shares here in the chat, when you see, you don't forget. My full Kundalini rising came with direct seeing of oneness, followed by twin flame announcement telepathically. I had never heard of it. 2 weeks later, had what I think is a rebus experience, which seemed to merge masculine and feminine astrally, but felt corporeally. Heart opening 2 months later, looking at a picture of the twin, had distinct connections with Jesus and Magdalene. Interestingly, I have several non-local energy interactions with multiple twins, not like mine, but on that journey. Very interesting stuff. It's always funny. I get some comments on YouTube now and then. People say like Kundalini is demonic, turn towards Christ. Stop messing with this stuff. It's like the people that I know who are having these direct contacts with Christ are all Kundalini people. So it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
Yeah, Jeff, you want to say more about your encounters with Christ and Magdalene?
Sure. I think now I have a different feeling about it, in that I think that the mind wants an explanation for the spiritual event. And so we overlay our upbringing or cultural meaning on top of it. So, Jesus is the nearest thing to my sort of deistic experience, right? Having been raised as a Christian and in a Christian society, where I think if I had been raised, say, in, China, it might have been another local deity, or in India, a Hindu deity. So I feel like it's we're reinterpreting an energy through our own lens, which is fine. Like, that's normal. But I think later development is more expansive than that. I think that's just my current thoughts about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. I've of course explored different takes on that, and I'm not necessarily attached to any one particular view, but yeah, that view makes sense. I've heard through Matt Kahn, actually, he told me that our higher self, the divine, the universe presents information to us through characters that we find safe so that we receive it easily, right?
Yeah.
But interestingly, Matt Kahn was raised Jewish. He had an out-of-body experience in which he describes going to a place that he understood to be heaven. And there was this man with a beard and long hair wearing a white robe, and he was, relating with Matt Kahn. And he's a young boy. A few days later or sometime later, he goes to a friend's house who's Christian, and he sees a picture on this guy's wall of the same man who he met in that out-of-body experience. And he goes, "Who the hell is that?" And the guy's like, "That's Jesus. You don't know who Jesus is?" He's like, "No, I never heard of this guy." So Matt didn't have any programming around Jesus and still had an experience with him. So interesting.
Yeah, super interesting.
Yeah. I have heard from some other people, they describe, like we were speaking earlier, they get a lot of power from seeing a picture of somebody that they don't even know. They don't know who it is, right? We were just describing Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava, right? Quincy didn't even know who he was, and yet he's still in such reverence, right? So I completely understand your take about the cultural conditioning and the way that we sort of package things up for ourselves, but then there are these experiences that seem to contradict it. So I don't know what it is. Maybe both, maybe neither, maybe something else altogether. It's fascinating nonetheless. Let's go over here to Colin. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Yeah, what Jeff was saying, that's so true. I mean, I'm really into listening to near-death experience stories, and so many people say they run into Jesus, or even if they're not religious. And then there's the people that also run into like Hindu religious figures, and that they have no clue who they are, but they translate it as something, like Jeff said, someone familiar, to make the experience more palatable, more easier to understand, to connect more, And I think I've had that same experience with family members and stuff that have crossed over. I question, was it really the family member, or they just took that appearance in order to make me feel comfortable with what was happening, But I think that's a really common occurrence, But I don't know. I found that interesting. There's something else I was going to talk about, I don't know, something that happened to me recently, but my train of thought got all screwed up. So anyway, so I guess you want to hear about it.
Well, if it comes back to you, Colin, please let us know.
Oh, yeah, okay. This is kind of off on the my weird path, synchronicity, life, whatever it is. Walking the dog, I met somebody, and kind of a trippy person. And I always kind of bait people to see where they're coming from, because this is all I talk about. This is all I think about. This is all. And half the people I run into, there's some connection. And of course, the second I bring up this, anything spiritual, oh, do you believe in past lives? Two hawks dip out of the sky within about 15 feet of me and kind of wrestle and tumble, and I'm like, okay, there's, I've just turned something on. But anyway, a conversation kept going through a couple different mornings, couple different walks, these long kind of conversations, and got very spiritual. And I mentioned something about Kundalini, and I think I scared the shit out of this person. I think even though so many people have this spiritual background and spiritual beliefs and stuff, when you bring up something mystical like Kundalini, and somebody that may not have experience or just knows hearsay of it, they always, what does she say? Something about to the extent of, oh, you got to watch out because sometimes it appears as love, but you're being deceived by negative energies and this, evil entities. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. You know what I mean? At least not me. I haven't had that experience on this trip. And it's just really funny to me how some people just instantly go to this almost biblical frame of reference, this Adam and Eve, this warning, this about the Kundalini process, when, that's not my experience at all. I know some people may have had it, and like I said, I'm my own worst enemy. The only person I have to fear is myself, really. My own ego, that's been the scariest strip on this trip. Anyway, hope that wasn't too much of a tangent for everyone.
Not at all. Fascinating, fascinating stuff, Colin. And remind us a little bit, like the hawks, that's not an isolated incident for you with birds.
Oh no. I saw birds the rest of that day too. Feathers started dropping in front of me. I saw another hawk. Hawks are really big, and I know that the twin hawks is more of a soul connection stuff. So I'm like, hey, either this is something really good that's happening right now, or this is an omen. But a warning. But I can't tell the difference. That's my only problem. I can't translate it. It's just I see it. Everything is synchronicity to me. Everything. So, but they're pretty profound. It's just my life now. It's just I synchronicity guides me. I wish it would get me off the couch sometimes, but but yeah, when I'm out in the real world, it synchronicity guides me. That's I'm just, that's how much it happens for
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
I like how you said it. This is just your life now. Yeah. Let's go over here to Nick B.
Hey, Brent, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure I don't have headphones. So yeah, I just wanted to comment on the symbol of the serpent. I find it interesting as well with Christianity and also like Western medicine too, like how the symbol of the serpent with the Garden of Eden they make it seem like when the serpent that the serpent is like a symbol of evil and that it should be, and that it corrupts Adam and Eve in the garden, and then they get expelled, and then from the Gnostic perspective, how they look at the serpent as like the symbol of all knowledge and gnosis and awakening. And obviously that correlates to like how we interpret the symbol of the serpent rising. And then how in Western medicine with the caduceus, how that the symbol has been kind of appropriated by Western medicine, and it's on every ambulance that passes by on the street, and it's on doctors' name tags. And yet they don't allow for, well, most psychiatrists don't allow for the ascension and raising and expansion of consciousness. So it's like they've turned this, the caduceus should kind of be flipped upside down. That's how I kind of see it in the Western perspective, and how Christianity, I mean, to me, the serpent is really a symbol of the unconscious, and all the wisdom and all the knowledge and all the power is there. There's also darkness and another side to the serpent that's in the unconscious as well, that can devastate and destroy and cause a lot of harm as well. So, but we have to encounter both sides of that equation when we kind of raise the serpent in us. So I think that's interesting. And then, yeah, so I think like there was an interesting video I saw by Graham Hancock, who was talking about the Gnostics, and he was talking about how the Gnostics, lashed out at Christianity back in the day and claimed that the God in the Bible was actually Satan, and that it's actually a demiurge, and that the Christianity, and they got rooted out and killed for saying these things. So it's a very controversial thing to state, and I don't want to like impose on anyone's beliefs with regards to Christianity and whatnot. But when you look at it from the perspective of the Christian interpretation of God, saying that you should fear God, saying that God is outside of you, saying that God is only a man, saying where is the feminine archetype, and why has the serpent been demonized? And you can kind of start to see how it was about control and keeping people's consciousness from waking up. Turn away from the serpent, it's evil. Don't go down that road. We don't want you to wake up, because we want you to think that the priest is the only conduit to knowledge and to God, and that conduit doesn't exist within you. So I think that's kind of like something that needs to be reclaimed with regards to the serpent, you know. It is deadly and dangerous, but it also contains all of the knowledge and wisdom, and so, you know, it's a powerful force, and to touch it should be done delicately. I had a similar experience to Samia, where I had a spiritual emergency that opened Kundalini for me. I had visions of Hindu gods that I'd never been exposed to before in that experience, and it was complete annihilation, and it was horrible. And then I was misdiagnosed. I believed everything they told me. Was on medication for 3 years that I didn't need to be on. So it was very much, you know, like a turn away from the serpent. Don't go down that road. And then I had a really strong calling to smoke cannabis while I was on medication, which seemed to turn off the effects of the medication. And then I had felt a strong calling to start meditating. And I was meditating on the third eye, and I was only doing like 15-minute meditations periodically, and I was going really deep though. And then one night I went home and meditated, and I had like this, my higher self like told me, keep going, go deeper. And I was about 20 minutes into meditation. I had this voice speak to me. And then I meditated for like a full hour. And after like over an hour of meditation, then it was like boom, Kundalini like exploded up my spine and awakened. So it was like I was being guided by, I think, Kundalini itself, by the goddess to awaken. And so yeah, and then so I went off medication pretty much instantly right after that, and like went through the process, and it was chaotic and wild and amazing and all those things, and everything worked out well. But yeah, so just to me, it's like, yeah, I had a lot of anger back towards this suppression and this manipulation of the archetype, manipulation of the serpent, and manipulation of all these things. Like you can just see how programmed everything is and how distorted all of this has become by the forces that be, and whether that's conscious on their part or not. I think it's mostly unconscious. I think there's highly conscious beings out there who are not good people, but I think mostly it's an unconscious fear that we project, that, you know, like people in lower states of consciousness project onto those who are awakening to try to stop them from waking up. You know, a fear of losing control in themselves and in society. That's how I see it. But anyways, thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Nick. Fascinating, fascinating insights. And of course, your story as well. Really intriguing. Not to invalidate what you've shared, Nick, not at all. I just have to remind everybody here that we are, just people on the internet. This is for education. This is for entertainment. If you are interested in, a conversation about medication, please consult your doctor, as opposed to using what we've talked about today to make these decisions. Talk to your doctor is very important. And just for the record, there are some pretty advanced spiritual teachers and people that have gone through Kundalini awakening that still make use of medication from time to time, it seems. So just wanted to put that out there. But Nick, really incredible, incredible take. And it's so interesting that your story lines up with some themes along with Samia as well.
Yeah,
Very interesting.
not to try to give advice or anything medically. That's just my experience for sure. Not everyone who's, going through mental health issues is awakening, or vice versa. It's kind of like that's a gray area. That's people need to figure that out on their own with their doctors or however they do it. Yeah, for sure.
Right. Thank you. And segueing from Nick and your share, Hugo here writes in the chat, on the notion of Christ, I've come to the realization that the Christ spoken about in Scripture is not a man, but a process of redemption, which is Kundalini. He shares a quote here. Arouse thyself, thou who art sleeping, and arise out of the dead, and the Christ shall shine upon thee. This is an invocation for the Kundalini to awaken from its dormancy and to go about doing its work of healing and restoration to one's essential state, a freeing from one's conditioned straitjacket into freedom. Powerful, right? So the Christ consciousness, what comes to me when I read your message here, Hugo, Christ consciousness. Not a man, but a state of being, a state of consciousness, a process, right? The Kundalini journey. Makes sense to me. Jeff shares here, in Hebrew, gematria, which is the study of numbers in the Torah, the word for serpent has the same number as Messiah. Very interesting, of course. This process seems to show up everywhere. Very interesting. Nick adds here, the Gnostics called the serpent Soter, meaning the savior. Let's go over here to Samia, and then we'll begin to wind down.
Hello again, family. No, I really wanted to make another point, especially about the medication thing. And I'm not advising anybody else to do the journey I did. It took a couple tries to get off. I was on medication for, like I said, 20-something years. And the doctor I was with was for 10 years. And he actually knew of this process I was going through. I told him I had a Kundalini awakening, and I definitely discussed getting off meds. And I did it for a year. I weaned off meds for a year. I kept seeing him even after the meds. So it was a planned process. I kept notes. I kept a diary of everything what I was doing. So I do not take that process very lightly. I want to make sure everybody out there that please do it on a medical advice, please, because withdrawals and different things, and your emotions and everything else. And I told family and friends too, like, this is what I'm doing. I had a safety plan as well. Like, I was really, really adamant about it. So I just want to encourage everybody, just don't jump off anything or jump on anything. Make sure you have a community of people around you to be like, okay, this is the process. This is what I'm going through, and to have all different alternatives that are natural, and to listen to your body. So I just wanted to share that and make sure everybody take that heat as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Very serious topic. And thanks for your example for handling it with such wisdom. Thank you, Samia. A few more comments here in the chat here. Monroe shares, Christ consciousness is the same as Kundalini. I grew up in a Baptist Christian household and was forced to go to church and a Christian school. The programming and indoctrination has been unraveling for me many years now. I realized it was put in place for me to work through, so I may help others work through it also. Fascinating. I like how you've got such an empowered take. You went through those things to help others to go through those things. Jeff shares here a quote, "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thine whole body shall be full of light." That's Matthew chapter 6, verse 22. Thank you all so much for your contributions tonight. This has been a really powerful call. I've been feeling lots of energy. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I hope I can get some sleep. Sometimes it's hard for me to get some sleep when there's a lot of energy moving through. You can visit kundaliniawareness.org to find a directory of licensed mental health professionals with Kundalini awakening experience themselves. So they're there to support you and validate you and empathize with you and not consider you crazy because, of course, they've gone through this themselves. You can submit your story to kundaliniawareness.org. You can read some of the stories that have been submitted. We've got some other peer support groups, some resources, some videos, some books. Check it out, kundaliniawareness.org. If you'd like to support me with a donation, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And if you have offered a donation, thank you, thank you, thank you. I've got my course, Grounded Spiritual Emergence and Integration. If you're feeling like you've got a lot of excess energy and you want to get really deep into your body and embody this spiritual awakening process, that course is there for you. Help you to get back into the world, live your purpose, embody your purpose in a grounded way, while, of course, making the most of your profound spiritual emergence. I've got some availability for one-to-one support meetings. If you'd like to meet with me later this month and go really deep, you can find out more at brentspirit.com. I've got a couple of different pricing options depending on your budget and what you're going through. I know that a lot of people going through this process have a hard time financially because, of course, it's pretty hard to get to work while going through all of this. And so I understand. I understand. Tomorrow, Kundalini Q&A meeting, Mondays, 2 p.m. Eastern. Join us. We'll go deep. We'll share some more support with one another. Look forward to you all connecting again. Got lots of people commenting about the energy in the call. Thank you all so much for contributing to the energy field together. Yes, it's hard to sleep, but of course, I think there are some great healing benefits to it as well. Some upgrades, deepening of the awakening process as a result of this powerful energy field. So thank you all for connecting with me today. All the links are in the description. Check it all out. Thank you all for your support. Until next time, much love and peace.